Cindy Robinson, welcome to Nature of Reality Radio. Yet another guest that Daniel Teague of Vegas Star Healings, who I've had on my show on 2 occasions and have given lots of good money for his healing and his healing work to do. Very benefited from that immensely. I have, and benefit a lot from the listeners that, the guests that he's suggested to come on my show, and I'm sure that this interview will be no different with you, Cindy Robinson, and ET Contactee. Now, just a couple of disclaimers for my listeners. As many of you have probably figured out by now, this show is going to be pay-per-view for the last, this interview, it may be a little, maybe shorter than an hour, so I may start making a pay-per-view 20 minutes in or so. So after that, I do hope that many of you will sign on to Patreon to be able to listen to some other juicy subjects and topics that I will certainly be discussing in the latter parts of this interview and other interviews as well. And also on YouTube, there will be a link to, on the abridged videos that aren't the whole entire thing, there will be also a link to Contactee, where I also upload my videos, the abridged versions that aren't don't have some pay-per-view parts. If anybody who sees that on YouTube could please listen to the interviews on Contactee. Only listen on YouTube for about 15 seconds for the sake of giving me view credit, and then listen on Contactee because I can monetize with that channel. It is a blockchain monetization channel. So with that being said, welcome to October, first day of October 2021. The energies of the new month are already strong and prominent, I'm sure. Let's hope the Mercury retrograde does not cause any problems. I've already asked my angels and guides to make sure that this interview is the best it can be for you, me as the host and you as the guest. So without further ado, Cindy Robinson, why don't you tell your story from a primary source perspective, explaining who you are and what you experience that causes you to talk about the stuff that you talk about and be the person that you are in the present day, and what makes you worthy of having Daniel Teague recommend you as a guest on my show. And then we'll get into some other questions about the subject matter. I will shut up and put myself on mute. I do not have Alex Jones-itis. I do not interrupt my guests. So knock yourself out. You got the floor.
All right. Thank you so much. I appreciate the airtime. So I guess I should start out like I'm a generational contactee. So that means I come from generations of contact, and it also corresponds and goes down the line with my 5 kids, as well as grandchildren and at least 1 great-grandchild at this time. So I started when I was, from what I could remember, 2 years old. And my childhood and most of my adult, I grew up in Wisconsin. And then family and stuff were all like up north in upper Michigan. And I have 26 cousins. And even to this day, whenever they see me, they'll go, well, Cindy, what have you seen lately? So it's a family thing. Everybody understands it. Everybody knows it. I have a brother and a sister. They too have had contact. At first, I thought that it was just on my mom's side. But then when my dad passed away, and he had been in the Navy during World War II, he admitted to me on his deathbed virtually that he did see UFOs, but he was not allowed to discuss it. He wasn't allowed to tell anyone. And even though, I'd be telling them throughout my whole childhood, teen years, and, I got married at 18, married for 53 years, and it still continued even with my husband. So 8 weeks into our marriage, we had our first sighting together, and it was blatant. We didn't realize at the time, because that was 1967, that it's what's called time missing. But when we came upon it, my husband is the one that spotted it first, and he had been in the Army during the Vietnam years, but he had gone to Seoul, Korea, and worked on helicopters and aircraft and stuff. So he was familiar, obviously, with, what the military and stuff had back then. But he was the one that spotted it first. And we were the only two people, on this rural highway in Wisconsin. And we were going out to see his brother on a Friday evening. And it was kind of like in October, early October, it was like what you'd call an Indian summer night. And so for us, we just said, hey, let's go take a ride out to go see your brother and his wife. And that's where we were going. So ultimately, when John spotted this, he was already pulling off the road, and we were literally parked right across from it. And we're viewing it out of his driver's side window. And the window was down. I know that when we were driving, we always had the radio on. However, it was weird. Like, neither one of us remember hearing the radio. Whether or not he put the car in park, shut it off, we don't know. But we were just like fixed, like watching this thing. And it was literally, if you can imagine, in a rural area, 2 telephone poles, that distance, it was literally hovering right above those wires. And it was a 2-lane highway, so we were pretty close. We could see it. It was typical saucer shaped, but on the underside or belly side, whatever you call it, it had rotating primary colored lights, and they were circular. And I do remember that. And it was weird. We're both watching this, and I remember John saying, "What is that?" And even though, I had my experiences all through toddler, childhood, teenhood, everything, I don't remember saying it's a UFO, because that's what we called them back then. And the next thing that we remember is kind of like you're waking up if you've been daydreaming. And I go, oh my God, we got to go get your brother. We got to show him this. And I do remember John putting the car into gear and pulling out fast, and we took off. And his brother's house was maybe about 8 miles away, and John was going pretty fast. And so they have a weird driveway, how their driveway is set up, their house, and then their garage is like offset. And their kids were teens. So I ran into the house as John was turning the car around up in the driveway, and I'm literally pulling them out the door saying, just get in the car. We got to show you something. And so they're following us and, or me, I should say, and getting in the car. And we're trying to tell them what we saw as we're driving back. And we went as far as the airport, the Milwaukee airport, and didn't find anything. And then we turned around and we started going back to their house, which that highway is like literally straight through to their turnoff. So we followed, what we're trying to tell them, explaining again what we saw. And it was bizarre. I mean, we knew it was dark out now. When we left our apartment, it was daylight. And we knew, we left around 7:15 at night, but we weren't paying attention to the clock or what time it was, nothing. And as we approached the area, all of a sudden, John's pulling off the road. He goes, what the heck's going on? He goes, look at that. There's all military in the field now. And they've got searchlights and men on the ground and Jeeps, and they're in this circular motion out in this big field. And it's exactly where we were. We knew it. And John sat there for a little bit and we're watching, and they were obviously searching for something. And then all of a sudden a Jeep started coming towards John. Well, John being in the military, he goes, oh, we're not staying here. And he pulled out and drove again. And we got to their house and we're sitting in their living room and we're talking and talking. And then I said, well, the Air National Guard must know what's going on. You know, they're stationed right at the airport. So think back to those days. That's where we had the phone on the wall and we had to look up phone numbers in the phone book. And so I went in the kitchen to call and the Air National Guard. And I do remember I got the typical gruff, older military gentleman on the phone, you know, and I'm trying to tell him that what we saw out there. And it seemed like he wasn't paying attention. And then he said, I said, well, there's men out there now. There's military out there, like searching where we saw this. And I said, I just want to know if anybody else reported anything or called in. And he goes, they're on maneuvers. And when he said that, I looked up. Over the stove was a clock on the wall. And I looked at it and I go, they're on maneuvers on a Friday night and it was almost midnight. And all of a sudden he goes, what's your name? And I got scared and I hung up. And so I go back in the living room and I go, is it really almost midnight? You know, and John's brother and his wife go, well, yeah, we were trying to figure out why you came to visit so late. And we're going, what do you mean so late? We left the apartment at 7:15. It takes us like 45 minutes to get here. And they go, no, you got here. It was like at least 9:30. And we're going, what? We're going, no way. We know what time we left. And they're going, you got here at 9:30 and you're pulling us out the door. So that was the first clue. We didn't know that's what's called time missing, but we really didn't remember anything other than like kind of feeling like we were in this trance. But we found out 10 years later, in between that time of 72, 77, we moved to Florida for 5 years. And then ultimately we ended up moving back to Milwaukee again. And we were looking for a house, but by that time we had 4 kids. And so we rented this townhouse on the outer western suburbs of Milwaukee while we looked for a house. And I'll never forget this. Like it was, I don't know exactly what date, but our oldest daughter, she was playing outside, and I know it was a Sunday because John was watching football, and again, it's the first week of October. And now it's, 1977. And all of a sudden, our oldest daughter comes running in the house, like I'm making supper and stuff, and she's pulling us outside, and she's telling us she's going, this thing. And she's like holding her hand over her head, like something sitting on her head, the top of her head. And we're going, what? And she had been playing out in the field with a couple of friends, but those 2 friends ran home when this happened. So we went out there with her. There was nothing there, and we're still trying to figure out like what she's talking about. Because you have to understand, like back then, they were literally putting people in mental institutions if you talked about this stuff. So we knew never to talk about it. And we certainly never discussed anything with our kids. We had the 5 years we were in Florida. We had a couple of like what you call sightings, meaning craft, but I don't really remember anything where we were literally being taken during that time. So getting back to our oldest daughter, and she's going on 10 years old, and her, all of a sudden, I brought her back in the house because she was just very distraught trying to tell us and explain to us what was going on, and John and I couldn't figure it out. So we got back to the townhouse, and I told her, I gave her paper and her crayons, and I said, draw us a picture of what you saw. So she drew a saucer. above her head sitting in this field. And the bizarre thing was that she pointed to the underside of the saucer, and she had made colored circles under there. And she goes, it goes round and round and round, the colors. And I mean, soon as I saw it, of course, I recognized it, and John did too. And we're looking at each other, and we're going, how would she know about this? So again, kind of ignored the signs. When we moved out to Arizona, decades later, I belonged to Dr. Ruth Hover's group. And I talked to her, about all this stuff privately, and she asked me to join the group. So ultimately, then the group knew about my history and everything. But she seemed to think that we had this time missing. And so I didn't understand what she was talking about. She offered to do what's called like a therapeutic hypnosis, a regression hypnosis. Well, she tried multiple times, and she just gave up. And she goes, Cindy, she goes, you obviously have a very strong personality. And she goes, I cannot break through that. She goes, you're just one of those people who cannot be hypnotized. I go, okay. So I just accepted it, and on we went with life. And like I said, it was decades later. And I belonged to a private group as well after our group with Dr. Hover broke up. But it was with some of those same people. We were meeting together privately at a home. And I'll never forget this. Like, two of those people who I've known, I consider friends, were trained in regression hypnosis. So everybody left that day after the meeting, and they said to me, they go, Cindy, why don't you let us regress you? And I laughed, and I go, well, good luck with that plan. I go, Dr. Hover couldn't even do it, and she's a professional. And they go, well, let's just see. So I really don't know if it's because I knew them as friends that I just relaxed enough. But we went in a spare bedroom, and I laid on the bed. And prior to that, they had written down some of the questions like I wanted to know. Obviously, there's two huge incidences in my life. When I was with my grandfather at 8 years old, when I saw Men in Black, and we would meet them out in the upper Michigan rural roads. And I always remember they would just appear. No vehicle, no nothing. And then my grandfather would take what looked like army green type tubes out of the trunk and hand them to these two men in black. And my grandfather never allowed me to get out of the car. He said I had to stay in there. Well, 8 years old, when you're out in the woods and you have to go potty, you always just like go out in the woods and go potty. So I do remember getting out of the car, going to the back of the car and telling my grandpa where I was going to go potty. And he looked at me and he was stern. And he goes, Cindy, I told you never to get out of the car. He goes, you hold it and you get back in that car right now. And I looked up and I remember seeing them, what they look like. I don't remember them wearing glasses, but they had black suits on, hats. I guess they're like fedoras, that's what you would call them. But I do remember their skin being this transparent, cloudy type, opaque, white skin. And it was almost like you could see like their veins or whatever underneath it. It was weird. But then I also remembered their eyes. And their eyes reminded me of the Greys. I was visited and taken many times by the Greys. And I always remembered their eyes. So if you think of, like, you know how like blobby lava lamps bounce around, with the blobs. So it's their eyes are kind of like that, but black, thick, liquidy. And then almost, like how mercury would flow, that thick, undulating. And that's what I remember about their eyes. But it was weird. These men in black, their eyes were the same thing. And I know people have asked me, well, they always wear sunglasses. And I go, well, obviously not, because I don't remember these two having sunglasses. And I know what their eyes looked like and what it reminded me of. But ultimately, I got back in the car. Never discussed it with my grandpa again. But it happened more than once. But after that, I knew no matter what, I wasn't allowed out of the car. But it went on for a few years. But I didn't have the sense to ask him what was going on. But I do remember at 2 years old, when he had a gas station, that I would take my naps in the big, like, gas station picture window. And it had a blue neon light that would buzz and flicker. And then there were always June bugs on the window. So the reason I mention that is because that kind of correlates with when I was taken. This cobalt blue light was often seen when I was taken, many, many times. And then when my kids were being visited, I knew when I saw that cobalt light under their bedroom doors that I was not allowed to interfere. And as a mom, I never felt threatened. They never, ever did anything like bad to us. If anything, we ended up with gifts from that, whether it was like a insightful feeling, knowledge, whatever. And the same thing with my kids. They never feared anything, but they accepted it. And even as a teen, our youngest son would always tell us, like, they were teaching him how to fly in his room, but he wasn't allowed to leave the room. That was the rule. So, you have to understand, when our family's going through this years and years and years, as the kids are growing up, and as I grew up with, it's something that you accept. Same thing, like my sister and I slept in the same bedroom, and we lived in a 2-bedroom ranch, a small, 900 square foot bedroom ranch. But the one thing I do remember is my mom switching the bedrooms all the time, because it was either the bedroom that faced the front or the bedroom that faced the backyard. And so I never asked my mom, but when my sister and I discussed years later, if she was moving our bedrooms, because, like, we would be taken from the bedroom, and if the ETs got mixed up, they'd go in that bedroom to get us, and we'd be in the other bedroom because my mom changed the bedroom. But my sister and I had bunk beds, and my sister's 5 years younger than I am. And I remember, even in the wintertime, like, I would scratch my fingernail on the ice, because they were rectangle windows. So the bed was along that window, and I would literally watch out in the snow, the winter, no matter what year it was, I was watching for them. And my sister always wanted to sleep on the top bunk. And my mom would say, not until you're old enough. So when my sister was finally given permission to sleep on the top bunk, I admitted to her a few years ago when we were talking about this, and I said, I have to admit, I said, when Mom said you could have the top bunk, I go, under my breath, I'm saying, oh, good, they can come and get you now. I can finally get some sleep. And she laughed, and she said, well, I remembered them coming to get you all the time. And I would watch, and I would wonder, well, how come they're not getting me? But my sister only remembers a few incidences, so I don't think my brother and my sister had as many incidences as we did, or I did personally. So ultimately, I'll fast track back forward again to a few years ago when, after that meeting, and they had me regressed, and they recorded it, and then they wrote things down, the answers that I, said to the questions and stuff. And I do remember them counting me out of it. So like around, when he was doing the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, waking me up, I thought it felt to me like I was levitating off the bed. And I remembered I felt weird. And like my whole body was numb, like literally from my lips down to my toes. And then I started like flexing like my toes and my fingers because they felt really stiff and they hurt. And both of them are looking at me and they go, "Are you okay?" And I go, "Yeah," but I go, "Nothing happened." I go, "Did I just like take a nap?" I said, "I'm sorry." And they looked at each other and they're going, "Oh no, you were not napping." I go, "What?" I go, "It never worked with Ruth." I go, "Really, you're telling me?" And they go, "Yes." So then we discussed my answers to what they asked and then some other stuff. So as far as with my grandfather, supposedly I claimed that in those tubes were star maps, but they were, I guess, what you would call like either, I don't know if you call it 2D or 3D, well, where there's like layers and then things are like off the original map. So, there's layers to that map, but they were star maps. And I go, "Really?" So it seemed odd. And I said, "Well, the big thing is," I said, "So what happened with our time missing then back in 67? And they both looked at me and they both held up their hands like in the air with their fingers apart, and they flexed them from the wrist, right and left, right and left. And they go, "You did that with your hands and you claimed that they taught you how to drive the UFO." I go, "Really?" And so ultimately I go, "Well, how long did you guys do this?" And they go, "Oh, we had you under like 2 hours." I go, "What?" I go, "Oh my God, my husband's going to wonder where the heck I am." And I had shut my phone off so we wouldn't have any disturbances. So I turned it on. Of course, he had left me messages. It goes, "Where the heck are you?" And I called him. I said, "Well," I go, "we were just goofing around and they claim that they did a regression hypnosis on me." I go, "I'll tell you when I get home." So I drove all the way home, which is like an hour, back to our house. And he worked from home at that time. And when I walked in, like, that home had like a whole open area, what you call open, from the kitchen to the living room or family room, whatever you call it, all open. And he was waiting for me by the big island. So I'm trying to explain to him, that they did this regression hypnosis. And he goes, "Well, what's that?" So I'm explaining to him. And I said, "But I asked them to ask me about the time missing." And before I could say anything, he held up his hands like they did and cocked them right and left, right and left. And he goes, "What?" "They were teaching us how to drive the thing." I go, "What? Now you remember?" And he goes, "Well, is that what they said?" And I go, Yeah, you just did exactly what they claim I did." And I go, "How can that be?" So we were, stunned in the least. But yet it was confirmation that obviously we came to the same thing, but he wasn't even a part of that regression. But it was weird. I mean, for me, it was like, I just like, I'm going, I can't believe this. And then, of course, at that time, my husband was starting to show signs of his Alzheimer's. But I still, I mean, he knew enough, even till the day he died, which was in 2020. He still remembered everything we went through, everything, what we did with the kids, the times that we were taken, even from our bedroom. There were multiple times when we were taken together when we lived in Avondale, and that house backed up in the distance to the Estrella Mountains. And we had tons of paranormal activity and ET activity all at the same time from that house. And I swore if that, if we ever could find out like what really sat on that property, that I felt instinctively like there was maybe Native American heritage or history, in that or on that land. That was in Garden Lakes in Avondale. But we had so much activity there. It was crazy. And we lived there for like 23 years. In each home that we lived at, I will tell you that we always had activity, but it wasn't the same. The most that we had in our home was the one in Avondale. So that's what made me feel like it was because of where it's at, or it attracted something, obviously. But it was pretty shocking. And then for that one incident in 67 to be verified by our oldest daughter, which Ruth figured out years later, that because I know when she was born and when I probably was pregnant, and I was probably about 2 to 3 weeks pregnant at the time that we had that time missing. So that's another thing to, say, well, is that why they came back when she's almost 10 as well and showed the same thing as what we experienced when she's in the womb starting her life? It's just kind of crazy. But I said, like, I have the mixture of paranormal and ET stuff. So, I kept trying to keep it separate. If one was happening, the other was happening. And I go, it seems to like mesh together. It doesn't make sense. Why does it always mesh together? If one's happening, the other is happening. So, I don't know. Even like now, as technology changed, so I'll go there. As technology changed and they take you, that was different as well. So in the early years, they literally would take you, or it felt like our body was going through a wall to go with them. And then decades later, as the technology changed, to me, I say it's technology changed, I started trying to explain to the group, in Dr. Hover's group, that it's not the same. They're taking us, but then that's when I was having what's called, I guess, like sleep paralysis, where you wake up. I would wake up literally in the bed in the Avondale house, and I would literally be looking, because all you can do is like move your eyeballs, like, oh my God, where am I? And even though it's literally maybe 10 seconds of that feeling where you can't move, I didn't like it. And over time, it started making me feel like I was having heart palpitations. So like panicky. And I remember I told the Grays, I go, if you're going to take me, stop doing that with the paralysis thing. I go, I cooperate with you. I don't fight you in any way. Please stop it. I don't like that feeling. Which is odd, because then I don't ever remember having it after that, except when we did the regression hypnosis. It was similar to that, where I couldn't move anything for a few seconds and it felt like I was levitating. So I do remember that. Whether or not that means something, I don't know. I never discussed it with a professional regression hypnotic therapist after that or whatever. I just kept things quiet. And, you still, like I had a career as a ICU nurse. And a lot of my coworkers knew, and I worked nights, so we would go outside and look around, see if we could see anything. And yeah, we saw stuff at a distance. And they accepted what I would tell them, what I was going through, and what John would go through, and we'd see different beings. And then I don't know if you know Cynthia Crawford. Cynthia Crawford is known in the UFO industry. She's passed away now. But she was the one that would sculpt ETs, different ETs. And she never had any formal training. But yet she was totally gifted, and she swore that the ETs were guiding her hands to reveal for people what they were experiencing from these different ETs, the different species. And her and I would discuss often when she was doing these sculptures, and we'd be on the phone, and even though I couldn't see them, she'd be discussing, and I go, no, that's not right. You need to switch up this or that. And when she'd finish, she'd look at it, and then I'd either go out to her house or we'd meet somewhere. And she'd show me, I go, oh yeah, that's perfect. And it was uncanny how talented she was. I guess she did, some of her sculptures ended up in some of the UFO movies, like for Hollywood. She did some scripts and whatever, and then they used some of her sculptures in those. I don't remember the names of those movies, but they're out there. Just look up her name. She's still out there on the internet, and you can see. But her and I had similar experiences as kids. We were close to the same age, and we felt like we were like literally star sisters, but from different parents. But even after she passed, I thought for sure like she would do some kind of indication, that, yeah, hey, I'm up here with the rest of them. And, everything we've experienced is really the truth. Because you still, you still have people out there. And even though they did a partial disclosure, you still have people that will laugh at you. They will make fun of you. And to me, it was always important. I always tried to take the perspective that, I'm an ICU nurse. I have a profession. I have a career. I'm not crazy. I know what I'm experiencing. I know what we're going through. And my husband is experiencing it as well, and my kids. And it's something I can't change, and I don't want to change. I welcome that. And like I said, we always kind of felt like we were given gifts or extra knowledge from it. Dr. Ruth Hover always used to tell me that, my phones are tapped. It was pretty obvious that they would tap my phones. We would go on these vacations. We did family vacations with the kids and stuff, and we would do cruises so we could experience the world. But yet, I had an agenda, obviously, when we were doing all this traveling, and it was to visit these places with ancient cultural attachments to like UFO stuff and ancient cultures, Indian cultures, things like that. I was always interested in that cultural philosophy, things like that, and I was looking for answers. And I was told, oh man, decades ago that, when we were on those vacations, somebody was watching us, they went along. And then it got to be a joke. I would say, well, good luck trying to keep up with us. And I purposely would not give information out except just to our kids, of where we were going. But I don't know, somehow, I don't know, they obviously know how to hack your emails and stuff because they always knew where we were. And my youngest daughter and I, who she had the most experience with the ETs, we would laugh and we'd go, well, I wonder who they're sending this time. And we would take random pictures while we're on vacation, knowing that, you know, a couple of them were the spies. And I just laughed and I go, they're so stupid. Why? And Ruth would say, Cindy, it's because either you're right in your predictions or they believe that you're being given messages. And I go, but it's so stupid. I'm not threatening. I'm not doing anything. I'm not a danger to anybody. Why would they waste all this money? And I go, now I'm purposely not going to reveal anything, right? So they can't find anything out. But I mean, a couple of times I will tell you, we ended up with what they claimed were FBI. And they would come to the door, ring the doorbell. A couple of times they told me, you know, don't, you know, you're saying too much. You need to quiet it down. And I'd go, what are you going to do if I don't? I go, I'm not saying anything that's threatening. I'm not threatening anybody. I'm telling my story. And I go, I talk to my friends and people in our groups. I go, what is that hurting? I go, if you want to know stuff, just ask me. Well, ultimately, you know, they never did that. And, you know, it just kept up for years and years and years. I mean, we would have cars parked out, SUVs, blatant government plates sitting out in front of the houses that we lived in. Even just recently, like about 4 months ago, couple of months ago. And I took a picture and it's like, are you kidding me? And I took the picture out the front window and I opened the door and went to take a picture, and they must have seen that I opened the door and they took off. But it was pretty obvious. I mean, the picture that I got, to me, it's obvious that it's a government, unmarked government vehicle, SUV, and you can just make out, and that's what caught my attention because the vehicle was sitting out in the front of the house for a while. And the sun was reflecting off of, like, you know how the police have their iPads mounted in between the seats, you know, up by their dashboard? Well, that the sun reflected off of that. So whether or not it was an unmarked cop car, I don't know. But then why are they taking off when I go to open the door to take a better picture? So it's things like that we've lived through. Like I said, I'm 72 now. Now I've decided, I asked my kids, I go, I can tell my story with not telling their names. My husband's passed away, but he was always supportive. He didn't care, you know, who knew? And so I said, it's time. And then when my husband died, my youngest son said to me, he goes, Mom, he goes, you need to write a book, tell your story. And I go, oh, well, if I write a book and tell my story, you know exactly what I'm going to write about. And he goes, yeah, that's okay. We don't care, but it's important. Like, you know, the youngest grandkids are like 9, 10, and 10, or 9, 10, and 11. And so they said, if even just for those younger 3 grandkids, and they've had experiences even since they were born as babies. That was a hard thing, you know, for the spouses to understand that, you know, their kids are being visited by something we don't know, we don't understand, but it doesn't seem to hurt them. So the best way I can explain it is My youngest daughter, when she had the two kids, they're close together in age. They're almost like what you call Irish twins. They're like 14 months apart. But I was always up there with her when she had them. And from the time they came home from the hospital, she would have the baby monitor, put them in the bed or the crib, and put the monitor out in the living room. And on the day she came home from the hospital, I'm not joking, if you saw the movie Signs, where they have the baby monitor, the kids are holding it up, and it makes that squeaky, distant sound, that's exactly what she would have. And she'd get up to go run into the bedroom, and I'd stop her and I go, they're just checking them out. And I go, just relax. They never hurt us. They're just going to keep coming back. Just let them do it. And so even as those babies got older, they all grew up with iPads. They would when my husband and I would go up there to babysit them if the parents were going on a vacation, and I knew the rules because the spouse didn't want to talk about it. But so I wasn't allowed to talk about it with the kids, which I didn't. I abided by those rules. But the kids, here they are, toddlers, and they're each had their iPads, and they're coming to me and John, and they're giving us their iPads, and they're pointing, and they're going, ET, UFO, ET, UFO. And, I'd look at John and I'd look at my daughter, and she'd go, Mom. And I go, I'm telling you, we're not talking about anything. We just got here. We just walked in the door. And so ultimately, it was just something that had to be accepted. And so as far as the other younger grandchild, so she grew up before we moved again in the downsized house. We were about 2 blocks or so, half a mile from their house. And when she was born, I remember she was about 3 or 4 months old. And my son came over to the house and he goes, Mom, he goes, you're going to have a talk with his wife. She's freaking out because the baby keeps waking up at like 3, 4 o'clock in the morning, like she's talking to someone. And it's not like she wants to nurse or have a bottle or whatever. They'll take her out of the crib and she's literally pointing. She ended up being a prodigy child. So everybody has to understand that when I'm talking about that child, I mean, she's very advanced. And so even at 3, 4 months, she's pointing to the ceiling and babbling, right? And I go, well, again, they're not going to hurt her. If anything, hey, she's going to end up being smarter. And ultimately, that's how it ended up. She's still, like a STEM magnet student. But she slept with her parents. They moved to Florida ultimately for business reasons. And she was 2.5 at the time when they moved. She's now 11. And she just, over the last couple of years, finally started sleeping in her own room. She slept in their big king bed. Little on, like she'd go to daycare. When she was in kindergarten, she fell asleep in school the one day, and the teacher ended up calling my son and his wife going, hey, what's going on? This is what she's telling us, why she's so tired at school and falling asleep. Well, she told the teachers, Well, the angels won't let me sleep. They keep me awake at night. So my son had me talk to her to find out like what's going on. And she goes, well, they're like angels. They fly around in the room. They're not butterflies, but they just fly around the room. They don't hurt me and they take me places, but they don't let me get any sleep. So then I'm tired. So ultimately, she started sleeping in her parents' bed to see if that would improve. But it still didn't matter because it turned out that my son and his wife ultimately were being kept asleep while they still took the daughter. Because then that son would tell me, he goes, it's like I feel like I have to get up and drink a pot of coffee before I even go to work and leave for work at 6 in the morning because I'm so tired. Like I didn't sleep, but I know I've been sleeping. And I'm like laughing and I'm going, oh my gosh. I go, you know what it is. I go, we can't do anything about it other than tell them to knock it off. You need your sleep. That's what I would do. And it worked. They would like stop for a while so you could literally catch up on sleep. Many times on my being taken, like I remember literally bumping into like what you would call like a pony wall on the UFOs. And you would like bump your shin or the side of your knee there, your leg, banging into it. And I'd get up in the morning and I'd look because my leg would be hurting. I have this massive bruise exactly where I know I walked into that wall because I remembered everything. Lots of times, some of the other incidences were this one time, I don't know if they were training me. It felt like they were training me for medical reasons on this massive UFO. And I remember I walked into this wall on the side, but yet there was this platform on the left. There were a female and a male adolescent couple. And, they were like hugging each other or whatever. And they looked up at me and they said, oh, you must be the nurse. And I remembered thinking, what? And they go, you need to go in there. And they pointed across the hallway to a wall. And I remember it being like it was shaped circular, like an elongated circular hallway. And I went over there and I remember standing there and I look back and I go, well, there's no door. And they go, just stand there. Well, and a door would appear and opened. And I remembered walking into this. It felt almost like you're walking into an auditorium. It was massive. And it had this it was bright, bluish light. It was a clear light, but yet it was subdued. Like it didn't hurt your eyes or anything. And I remembered seeing like all these like stainless steel tables. And there were ETs on some of them and humans on some of them. And then there was this group of ETs. And I kind of felt like I did as a nurse, with doctors. You'd go on these rounds to these patients. However, they were showing me then their equipment, which wasn't like ours. I mean, if I had to explain, I knew it was a scanner, but it was something that would come down over them and literally hover over them. And then it was healing them with some kind of electronic therapy and light therapy. But it was important. They made me understand that they were like working on these ETs and these people. And I was supposed to be learning this. And that happened quite a few times. And then this one time, I don't like reptilians. I will tell you that much. I don't like snakes either. And that's what the reptilians always reminded me of. But I will tell you, there's two different reptilians. I've differentiated them with some are good, some are bad. The bad ones, I call them draconian reptilians. I feel their bad energy. I don't like being by them. And then there's the good reptilians where I don't feel threatened. And they took me like 3 times on different occasions, and they had me telling me that this reptilian was sick with a human ailment, and I was supposed to cure them. And I go, I don't even know what's wrong with them. And even though I worked as an ICU nurse, I was certified in the alternatives. And I did Therapeutic Touch, where, you run your hand over someone's body a few inches above them, and you can feel I can feel their electrical field. And when there's something wrong in their body, it creates like this heaviness. And I would go over there and try to straighten it out, move it, get rid of it. And often I would tell even my patients and stuff, like, don't tell me what's wrong with you. Just let me do Therapeutic Touch, because this is how I practice and develop my skill. And I had a good enough team and a manager and administration that allowed me to do this, as long as, the spouse, family, or patient and or any combination gave me permission to do that, along with, the typical Western medicine. So I did seek my double doctorate in that, but I never finished. But I felt really good doing that. I felt confident, and I could really feel people's energy. And so I said to those reptilians, I go, the only thing I know to do is to do Therapeutic Touch. And so I would do that, but I remember them telling me that I was offending them, because I had this repulsed feeling, because, to me, they're still like a snake type reptilian. I don't like touching them. And ultimately, they would put my hand down on the forearm part of the body and tell me to like pet them, so I would get used to that feeling. So I remember they took me like 3 times. It might have been 4, but confidently I'm telling you it was at least 3 times. And I would do this Therapeutic Touch and then petting the arm of this reptilian. And when they didn't come anymore, I didn't think to question, like, I wonder what happened. I mean, I did say I did do an interview with someone else recently, and they asked me, they said, well, what do you think happened? And I go, well, hopefully a good thing. I said, I mean, otherwise, it turned out really bad. So hopefully that didn't happen. Internally, I didn't feel like that was the case. I kind of felt like I did something that was important, and it cured that reptilian. And then they never came back to get me because it wasn't necessary. So ultimately, those are my big stories. So I don't know where we're at time-wise.
Well,
I
actually,
think
you
we're
went over
going
an
hour.
hour, so That's awesome. I mean, it's a rare gem to have a guest on my show who can just keep talking and talking and talking without me having to ask any questions and cut down on my speaking time because some people say I babble too much, too many soliloquies. So this was pretty amazing. To be honest with you, I don't really know if there's any questions worth asking because I think you could have covered everything you could have covered about your experiences. I'll make sure that I title this program "The Great Tales of a Generational ET Contactee," and I'm sure the fact that you're generational will certainly draw a bigger crowd than someone who just has contacts all by themselves. But this is a case of someone with a family involved, so people are certainly more interested to
Right.
hear something like
Yeah. And
that.
I mean, just so you know, Andrew, that, even though my kids are important in their jobs, they have, really like high up jobs. And so they allow me to talk about experiences because they trust me that I don't give away anything as far as that would threaten their careers. So I hope everyone understands, that I can't reveal that part. But, and if they could, I mean, I'm hoping someday, um, they'll be able to come forward. It'd be a shame, after I'm gone, if nobody continues on to reveal anything. It would really be a shame when I know the contact still is there. So I'm hoping maybe with disclosure, we'll all get lucky, and it'll be more acceptable terms or stuff to talk about. That's what I'm hoping. I mean, it's always been hard for me to believe that anyone, if you really think about it, how big the universe is, to literally and be arrogant enough to think and spiritually that really God only created us, that's pretty sad, you know? And I've never felt that. And I mean, I grew up Catholic. We were for many years in the Mormon church. And man, I got in trouble even in the Mormon church. Ultimately, I just say I'm my own now. But I had near-death experience personally from an error that occurred in surgery with anesthesia. And, I had a grandfather that had been dead like a year and a half come to me during that and telling me, oh no, it is not your time to die. You need to, you know, you need to go back. No, you're not staying here. But I do specifically remember the feeling during that time. And, I felt I was there with people I knew, the peace, the love, and I carried that over in my care for patients, working in a cardiac unit, people are dying. I always felt like that was the gift that I was given from the ETs, that acceptance, knowing that there's another life, there's another aspect of a being. And whether you want to call them ETs, aliens, angels, spirits, whatever, it's definitely a combination. I know that because through my whole life, like I said, I tried to keep it separated, and no matter what I did, it meshed together. So there has to be something to that. There's a reason for that. It's because it's not meant to be separated. There's a reason why those things are together. So,
Well, thank you. And there's really no point in me making any part of this interview pay-per-view. I'll make the whole thing free because I didn't have a chance to ask any questions. I mean, I could ask questions for an hour, but I used to do 2-hour shows, but that cost me dearly in terms of getting a big audience because people have lousy
right.
attention spans. So I finally decided enough of the 2-hour stuff. Let's just do hour shows now. So it was a pleasure
Okay.
having you on. By all means,
Thank you
yeah,
so much. I appreciate it.
yeah, and by all means, I have to thank Daniel Teague again. Thank you very much, Daniel, for recommending you. This is a very enlightening, very interesting talk that I did listen to from a generational ET contactee. Good luck, Cindy. I hope
Thank
all
you,
any
Andrew.
contacts you have in the future are for the better, for humanity and yourself and your family and everyone else. So, namaste and best of luck to you. Take care.
Thank you. Bye bye.